Hello, and welcome to the Tifo Football Podcast. I'm Joe Devine, and I'm joined now by Seb Stafford-Bloor.
Hi, Joe.
Hello. Seb and I were joined today by Rob Tanner, who is the Leicester City correspondent for The Athletic. A very knowledgeable man about all things Leicester City. Seb, what did we talk about in bullet points, please?
Oh, all kinds. We did the commercial department, the appointment of a new commercial director. We did plans for stadium expansion, new training ground. Did a little bit on Brendan Rodgers and the softening of his personality, should we call it? Yeah, it's super interesting. Rob was great.
Yeah, cool guy. I particularly enjoyed the bit about the golf course.
Yeah, that was a good bit, actually, yeah.
Don't know why it took me so long to think of the words golf course, but it did. Anyway, there's a bit about a golf course, and there's a lot of stuff about Leicester City. I think they're an incredibly well-run club. They're very exciting for me to watch. I know I make this analogy every other episode and have done for 10 years, but they remind me of that Everton team from the mid-2000s.
Oh, God, don't do that again.
Do you remember that one? No, just honestly, it's true. It's true, though. The one that has all of the good play, had a lot of good players just outside of the top four, but it managed to maintain for numerous years a squad and a first team of excellent players. I feel that Leicester are the 2020 version of that Everton team.
You know the problem with this is that you make this point on every podcast, and then online when the podcast comes out, you backtrack on Twitter or something. It's like watching someone's breakdown. It's just, it's terrible podcasting.
Listen, you should have just left me to make it because it's a very good point. It's a very good point. Anyway, I'd say that most teams can be compared to that Everton team. But anyway, this is Leicester City, and we will leave you now in the no, we won't. Not yet, because first I have to plug you something. And the thing I'm going to plug you is it's a good thing. It's an excellent thing. Guess what it's called, Seb?
Is it The Athletic?
Ding, ding, ding.
There it is.
That was actually more sinister than the boxing ring thing. It's The Athletic. Hey, if you visit theathletic.com/Tifo, you can get an incredible offer, which includes a free trial to The Athletic, where you can find just the highest standard and quality of sports writing and journalism available online, I would say. Specific interest, of course, today to the work of Rob Tanner, today's guest, who writes all about Leicester City, and whose coverage I particularly enjoy. So if you like Tifo and you want to support us, the best way to do that is to accept one of those offers. So do visit theathletic.com/Tifo. Enjoy Rob's work, enjoy helping us, and enjoy all of your future time reading The Athletic. Anyway, with no more further ado than has already done, we leave you in the capable hands of Rob Tanner. So, the club appointed a new commercial director in late 2019, Dan Barnett. He came from a company called US Ski and Snowboard in Utah. Very exciting. What changes has he brought with him, Rob? And more broadly, what are the club's commercial challenges heading forward?
Well, the challenge is always to try and produce enough revenue streams that can allow them then to challenge the Big Six. If the plan really is to be a contender and to break up that monopoly at the top of the Premier League, then obviously they're going to need to invest in the club. But I think there's a reality around Leicester City about where they are in that aspect of it. Yes, they're owned by King Power, massive international company, billionaires, but still the money they can spend, the model of the club is nowhere near the clubs that they're aspiring to challenge on a consistent basis at the moment. So they're always trying to explore new revenue streams, try and develop and build the business. It's come a long, long way in a short space of time. I mean, I remember 2002, they went into administration and nearly ceased to exist. So it's been a long process to get back now. And obviously a big moment was when King Power came in and invested in the club so much and wrote off £103 million worth of loans. They converted it into equity, so they basically just wrote that off. So yes, it's going to be. They're trying now just to try and explore more avenues for revenue, because I think what we have learned about the coronavirus situation is that football in England is so reliant on television money at the moment. But I don't think it's viable to continue in that aspect because, as we've seen now, with the rebates that might be coming back and stuff like that, it's the Premier League is going to be a different place. And if you can generate income from lots of different areas, then that'll stand you in good stead.
Rob, I was having a look at the recent financial results that were released, and it shows a rise in turnover from 158 million to 178 million. And roughly speaking, that kind of fits a trend of a 20% increase every season since promotion, with the exception of the Championship season and the Champions League revenue that followed. What is the what has been behind that performance? I saw also that commercial revenue has doubled from 14.2 million to 29.9 in 2019. I mean, Dan Barnett's coming in. He's obviously inheriting a pretty healthy department.
Well, yeah, and I think a lot of the credit has to go to Susan Whelan, the chief executive at the club. She is a prolific businesswoman. She's been with King Power for a long time of her career. She came over and she was juggling the two roles between working for King Power, and I think she still might be at the moment, but she's very hands-on and very influential at Leicester City, and part of her brief was to remodel and reshape the way Leicester City went about its income, its revenue, and I think she's a very astute, very well respected within the Premier League businesswoman that has really got developed a model that the club are moving forward. And even now they're looking at different projects around the city in terms of what they're going to do with the stadium expansion. We've got the training ground, which hopefully will be complete for when then the next season, whenever this might be, when the next season kicks off. I think she deserves a lot of credit on that.
I'm going to come back to the training ground because I want to ask you about that as well. But I just want to pick up on something you mentioned, regarding the commercial aspect of the club. You sort of suggest, well, if the idea is to compete with the top six, then Leicester are a long way away. Now, I know that everyone listening will sort of know that, broadly speaking, but in terms of the finer details, do you think you'd be able to walk us through exactly what that why there is that gap? I mean, obviously it's partly from the commercial aspect, right? But also the King Power Stadium is smaller, so match day income is going to be less. Is it that we're talking about, Rob?
I think it's more the global impact. I mean, the brands of Man United and Liverpool globally are huge. And I witnessed this myself when we had a pre-season tournament in Hong Kong, and I went over, and West Bromwich Albion, West Bromwich Albion, Crystal Palace and Liverpool were also involved in the tournament. And everywhere you went, all the fans in the crowd, they loved it, the Premier League, but they were all there for Liverpool. That is the great reach of Liverpool, Man United. They're all huge brands, and I think that is the biggest difference between Leicester is still a brand that's very much still growing globally. So there's all those revenue they can get from overseas. You would think, being owned by Ties and the and King Power Group, that there would also be revenue for them in other markets, and I think there is. They are developing that. I know there's a massive shop in duty free in Bangkok Airport which sells Leicester City merchandise and things like that. But I think with what they're trying to do now, and it's going to take a long time for them to be there, is to try and compete on broader revenue streams, more international revenue streams as well.
And I mean, you've mentioned a couple of examples there, but just generally speaking, how would a club go about doing that? And I know if you had the honest answer to that, you'd be in charge of Leicester City. But yeah. Just within the confines that we have, and respecting the fact that Leicester City are unlikely to catch up to Manchester United and or Liverpool in terms of their global commercial growth. But what are some of the things that the club have attempted to do to expand that fandom overseas?
Well, they're trying now actually to. Well, it's like a chicken and egg situation. What comes first? You've got to be successful on the pitch. You've got to capture the imagination of football fans around the world. And they did that in 2016 with that incredible title victory. Now they're trying to build on that. I know that they've been using some of the legends like Jerry Taggart and Matt Elliott, and they've been going out to America a lot. They can see a market there that they can try and tap into and try and develop. I did a piece for The Athletic recently talking to all the various Leicester City fan clubs around America, which there are numerous. They seem to adopt them as their team because they love the underdog story. But so what they're trying to do now, and they're doing it in Australia and other places as well, is just trying to get out there, get the message out there that Leicester City are a club that is aspiring to be up there challenging with the elite of English football. And if they can develop that and grow the interest in Leicester City internationally, then obviously that'll create opportunities then to develop revenue streams as well.
Rob, I was having a look at the concepts for the new training ground in Seagrave. And it looks amazing. We're talking of elite football. It just looks absolutely state of the art. I think I'm right in saying that the original move-in date was June 2020. How's that been affected? I mean, I imagine that it has been affected by the coronavirus. What's the latest in that situation?
Oh, it's still developing. It's still going. It's still going on. The construction.
So you got a full staff on site there at the moment?
They've got a staff on there. I think obviously the coronavirus situation, the social distancing has caused a few issues there, but they're still confident that it will get done. It probably won't be at the original deadline that they wanted. They wanted to be in there for pre-season in July, but certainly they're still hopeful that when the next season starts, whether that be September or October, they'll be in there. I mean, if you see the latest images, it really is taking shape now. And John Ledwidge, the head groundsman, and his staff have been down there working on the pitches, but not just the pitches. There's a 9-hole golf course there as well for the players and the staff to make use of as well. And they've been working on those. They become greenkeepers as well. So, the work is still very much ongoing, and there will be a slight delay, but I think they're still very confident they'll be in their new home, because this is the important thing. And this is another thing that points at the ambition of the football club, because majority of the work the players do, their working environment is down the training ground. It's not on the stadium on a Saturday afternoon. It's down that stadium. And if you've got a training ground which is state of the art, it will help them bring in the sort of players they want and need if they're going to be pursuing the Big Six on a consistent basis. So it is a really important project for them. It's going to cost over £100 million now, and that's a sizable investment. And then they're going to look at developing the east stand of King Power Stadium and the land behind it as well. So there's a lot of projects going on at the moment that require a lot of money.
Who's the keenest golfer amongst the players, Rob?
Well, this is the thing, Sam. I remember in the 80s and 90s, the players all were out golfing, but football now, the professionalism of it is so... They're not allowed to walk around for 4 hours anymore. They have to sit down and lie down. I can remember talking to Jack Hobbs, the former centre-back, about his passion for snooker. And I said, oh, yeah, you've got to practice a lot of snooker. And I said, do you get time? And he said, I'm not allowed to stand up for more than an hour. He said, I can only practice an hour at a time, then I have to go and sit down, because they've got to be fresh for Saturday. So, yeah, I can't see... Perhaps 9 holes is a good compromise, but I can't see the guys going out for 4 hours, dragging their clubs around. I don't think the sports scientists would be into that.
No, right. Well, I guess, on the point of sitting down, let's talk about the stadium. Presumably they're adding seats. I mean, you mentioned it there. I know that they've said the new capacity is supposedly going to be somewhere in the 40,000s. But where's the extra capacity coming from? I mean, are they going to be knocking the East Stand down and rebuilding, or extra tiers? Or do you have any information about that, and also part of the process and how long the timeline is?
Yeah. Very similar to the development at Anfield. They're going to build over from the back over the existing stand to add roughly 10,000 more seats for the stadium. This has been something that's been discussed around Leicester City for a number of years, and I think initially the club's ownership and Cumbershire wanted some sort of assurance that if they added that much, then the fans would come, that they would be able to fill them, because the last thing they want is empty seats in the ground, because they love the atmosphere of home games at King Power Stadium, because it is a great atmosphere at the games. So they didn't want to water that down by expanding the stadium and then the fans not coming. But I think they've been assured now that supporters would come, and they would come in the numbers as well. So they're pressing ahead with those plans for that. They purchased land from behind the East Stand, the area around where the helicopter crashed, around that area where there's a permanent memorial now to Cumbershire. It's quite a sizable area of land. And so what they're planning to do when they develop it is incorporate within the structures things like a club museum. There's going to be a statue of Cumbershire on the other side of the ground as well. But there's the memorial to Cumbershire in there as well. But then they're going to have a fan park. It looks like it's going to be a fan park in that area as well around there, so the fans can come down and make more of an occasion of a home game. They can come down a few hours before, enjoy a bit of music, food, drink, whatever, in the fan park area, and then filter into the stadium for match days. So I think the priority has been the training ground. So I think once the training ground's finished, we could start looking at developments of that part of the plan. They're still very much in the planning stage of the stadium expansion, but I'm told it will go ahead at some stage. So perhaps in the part of next season, we'll probably hear a little bit more once they're up and running again with the Seagrave project.
Can I just take us back a little bit for the sake of some clarity? After Kunvashai's passing, was there any long-term effect on the structure of the club, the hierarchy within it, or did things carry on as normal just with his son in his place?
Yes, very much so. They did. Again, Susan Whelan stepped up with all her staff. She was fantastic during that dark period, and she steadied the ship because obviously, he's just lost his father. Vichai had gone, and so Top Ayawat, his youngest son, who's being groomed to be his successor, had to be given time to deal with that himself. And then eventually he came in, and he was probably more hands-on around the club anyway than Kunvashai. Kunvashai is very much a great leader, figurehead, but his big concern was obviously the King Power Empire back in Thailand. So we did used to see Top more than Vichai around anyway, but now Vichai's stepped up into the chairmanship of the club, and it's been seamless in many ways. All the projects that Kunvashai talked about, like the training ground, like the stadium, they've just carried on as normal, and there's more drive, there's more clarity about how they go about these projects now, because they're determined to fulfil the legacy and the vision of Kunvashai for him, and I know Top is very much at the forefront of that.
Just a strange question, because I've never encountered a situation like this, but what was the club like for you to cover in the period after that? I hope that doesn't sound too maudlin and morbid. I just
no, it's understandable.
I understand it would have changed your job, wouldn't it? I mean, just in the way that you carried out and the way you questioned players and staff members, and I can't relate to it.
The best way for me to describe it is when they won the title, 2016. I saw the whole city rejoice, and Eyes of the World were on the club, and we had TV crews coming in all the time and radio crews ringing us up and for little bits and bobs because they didn't know much about Leicester. But the whole of the community, it's a very diverse community in Leicester, but they're all united behind the football club. And we went down to the stadium on the day they lifted the trophy, and there was a Bhangra band playing outside, and there was like loads of fans singing and dancing with them, and it was a great way of unifying the whole city. When with us Kunvashai, after the helicopter crash, we saw the community come together again in a very, very different way. Where there was champagne corks and what have you outside the stadium, people were laying shirts and scarves, and it was just in stark contrast to the scenes that we had witnessed in 2016. And some of the fans that I know, and certainly some of the members of staff that I've known for a long time at the club, who that I'd come to know over the years, and they knew Vichai. To see them grieving the way they did, I mean, I know Jim Donnelly is the supporter liaison officer. He went viral in 2015-16 with his over-enthusiastic celebration of a goal against Aston Villa. Which
that guy. Yeah, that guy.
Yeah.
You mean, yeah.
Well, I saw him outside the stadium one day when I went down to have a look at the memorials and all the shirts and the flowers and the messages and stuff like that, and he was in tears. Emotionally, it was just too much. It was a real shock to the system, and those moments as a journalist, you have to show respect to everybody involved. The football doesn't really matter that much now. It's the community that you serve for your local newspaper or whatever that you've now got to show respect to as well. So it did change the way I worked a little bit, but it was just another incredible experience in terms of the 10 years I've been covering Leicester City, because just when you think you've seen it all, something else happens.
You know, Rob, Seb and I are pretty lucky in that we get to speak to a correspondent from The Athletic every week to talk about their club. And obviously you guys are insanely knowledgeable and very entertaining. But we do get to hear a lot about the way that football clubs are run. We get to hear about the structures and the people involved. And for the most part, that's a pretty sort of successful operation. You know, I think being able to hear more about the behind-the-scenes stuff certainly has given me more of an understanding and appreciation of the hard work and the organisation that has to go into running a football club. At the same time, there are clubs that are better run than others, and it strikes me from what I've read about Leicester, from listening to you talk and reading your work about Leicester, and even from just watching Leicester at the weekend, that they're an incredibly well-run club. Is that fair to say, do you think, in comparison to other teams in the Premier League, or am I a bit dewy-eyed?
No, I totally agree with that. They are an incredibly well-run football club. What they do very well, and this has come from the very top, is tap into the community. They do a hell of a lot of work around the community in terms of fundraising charities. I mean, Alan Birchall, the club ambassador, has been doing his end-of-season run around the pitch to raise money for charities for 40 years, but it's only since King Power came in that those fundraising efforts have really started to flourish, and they do a lot of work with local charities, hospitals. So, and because obviously Leicester fans will all be affected by these organisations. You know, we all use hospitals. We all, if you might have somebody who's got learning difficulties who's going to benefit from some facility that Comfort Chives personally give them money to, and they've done that very, very well. But in terms of running of the football club, they are very astute business people, and again, I mentioned Susan Whelan as the real driving force for that. They don't overspend. They don't risk the club. They respect the club's tradition and heritage as well, which is a big thing. I mean, if you walk around the corridors of the West Stand of King Power Stadium, it's basically a museum. So they remember all the history in the past. And we have seen many, many times overseas foreign ownerships that come in and they haven't respected that heritage and that history quite so much. I mean, I'm thinking Cardiff City when they changed from blue to red for a start off. I mean, that didn't go down very, very well with them. So, and personally, I come from Birmingham area, so I've seen some of the ownerships over there and how dreadfully they've gone. So I always say to the Leicester fans, it's like winning the lottery when you got these owners, because they're just so level-headed and rational about how they go about things. And they realise they've got something special within the Leicester community in the football club. It is a focal football club of the whole of Leicestershire, and they've been very good in terms of protecting that, and that sort of has earned them a lot of brownie points as well with the supporters.
Alex, Leicester have tactically reinvented themselves, and I think you will have heard us listeners talking about this throughout the rest of the podcast as well. But one of the things I'm so fascinated with when it comes to Leicester is the fact that they won in 2016, which was an extraordinary and paralleled event. And I think many people expected them to fall away again, and for Leicester to be in the position that they are this season, even though it's during a break, and for Leicester to have been so successful with that transition from the Ranieri type football, eventually finding the Rodgers type football, or certainly moving their way towards that position. I mean, from an outsider's perspective, it seems like they've done an astonishing job. Is that what you see, Alex?
Yeah, I think what's really interesting is that they have in some ways returned to aspects of what they did successfully under Ranieri. So what Rodgers has managed to do is inject real dynamism, particularly in transition going forwards, while at the same time having that, passing, slow style of keeping possession at the back, which Rodgers is obviously known for from his time at Swansea particularly. The reason I think Leicester are doing particularly well is that they've managed to meld what they want to do stylistically with the acquisitions of certain players. So obviously in players like James Maddison and Harvey Barnes, they've got kind of young, dynamic, quick players. Vardy's extremely fast as well. So there's there was already a basis in that squad for playing very vertical football. By vertical, what we mean is the ability to transition quickly from the back to the front. But they've also recruited smartly, so with people like Dennis Praet, Yuri Tillemans, Ayotso Perez, they've augmented the squad with further of those sorts of players who are able to play in a particular kind of way. They've got two extremely good fullbacks, arguably the best fullback pairing after Liverpool, in Ben Chilwell and Ricardo Pereira. That gives them width on the outside. Then they've got these players who are very, very good at sort of quick one-touch football, receiving the ball, turning, playing it forwards very vertically. And so, the squad is geared up to what they want to do, but they've augmented that with acquisitions, and they've played to their strengths in terms of Rodgers having this game plan of, how can we get the ball forwards quickly? It's kind of like a reaction to Claude Puel's very sort of horizontal, quite laboured style, which we saw when he was at Southampton as well. Defence first, keep the ball, shift it around, probe for an opening. And that wasn't playing particularly to Vardy's strengths. And so Rodgers has kind of come in, reinvented the wheel slightly by going back to some of what Ranieri did so well, but also with this crop of young players who can add a greater degree of control through the middle when they're doing it.
Can you give me a few of the central tenets then of a Rodgers type team? Are we seeing that with Leicester now? Has Rodgers adapted what he wants to do to work with this team, or are we seeing his imprint as we saw it at Celtic and even before that at Liverpool?
I think there's a degree to which it's a bit of both. I mean, Rodgers definitely likes possession. He likes his teams to work the ball forwards relatively slowly to begin with. And we can see in terms, for example, of looking at Kasper Schmeichel's passing numbers that, as a goalkeeper, Schmeichel has really had to adapt working under Rodgers. He's playing shorter passes much, much more. He's linking with the defence much, much more rather than just lumping it forwards and trying to set Vardy free into space. So there is still that measure of control. I think what Rodgers has done, though, is he's looked at, particularly in this central midfield area, which is really the absolutely crucial area for Leicester. So they've got Wilfred Ndidi as their first choice and Hamza Chowdhury as kind of their backup guy, as this screening midfielder who's able to cover a huge amount of ground and do a lot of defensive work. Ahead of them, what Rodgers likes to do is play James Maddison and Yuri Tillemans. Now, both of these players they're slightly different. Maddison is a more effective ball carrier. Tillemans is a more dynamic passer. But both of them are very, very good at receiving the ball, either kind of laterally into them and then immediately releasing it, or taking a pass when their back is to the opposition goal, turning and then releasing it forwards. And this allows Leicester to play with a greater degree of verticality. So I think sometimes people have characterised Brendan Rodgers before, probably slightly unfairly if you look at what he did with Liverpool, but as playing a kind of a tiki-taka positional play style. And while there's still that degree of security and possession towards the back of the pitch, as Leicester move forwards, they become a really dynamic, almost a counter-attacking team, but they don't necessarily have to do it on the counter. This can be a sort of slow release and then a sudden pouring forwards. And because they've got players like Harvey Barnes or Mark Albrighton or Damari Gray, who are very, very quick on the outside, Perez, who's a very capable ball carrier and a very kind of astute, intelligent, heads-up sort of footballer, and then obviously Vardy at the front of that, Leicester can attack with a degree of pace which really probably only Liverpool can match.
And is the idea of that then, the pace and the verticality, is the idea just to catch the opposition out? To try and get them on the back foot by moving the ball forward so quickly and maybe unexpectedly?
I think that's partly it, yes. I mean, what you have is particularly with that front three, you've got players who are very mobile. So Vardy, generally speaking, will play on the last shoulder of the opposition defence, but he is good at dropping in and linking up play. But the wider players are very, very astute at cutting inside and finding space in between the lines. So when you've got players who can transition the ball very, very quickly and find these penetrative passes through the opposition lines, then you're able to move the ball very quickly up the pitch sometimes we're talking like 2 or 3 passes. I mean, it can be, so it's not necessarily this idea that Leicester are kind of hanging on to possession in the same way that maybe Brendan Rodgers' Swansea did. They seem to know almost instinctively when it's an opportunity to pass through the lines directly in that way and when it's not. Of course, the other thing that they can do is, because they have these wide players that tuck inside and are capable of producing really nice kind of quick, incisive passing movements between them, that also allows the fullbacks to push up and give lots of natural width that way. And in Pereira and Chilwell, they've got 2 exceptional fullbacks who are very, very good defensively, yes, but are also very good pushing forwards, capable of creating from crosses. So Leicester have a quite a natural plan B, where they'll pour forwards, work the ball into those attacking areas quickly. If that doesn't work, then there's an opportunity to recycle the ball, get it out into the wide areas and look for a cross, by which time they already have 3 or 4 players in the box, because the opposite-sided wide player is tucked inside, Vardy's there, and at least one of the attacking midfielders is pushed up too. So there's a kind of a natural plan B for them. And this can occur in the same phase of play quite easily. You know, they'll attack with the verticality, that breaks down, and so they go wide, and they've got these fullbacks there waiting to get the ball into the box.
The team seems to me to be very finely tuned, is maybe the way to put it. And I wonder, as I do with teams like this, obviously this is the first sort of real bout of success Leicester have had since they won the title 4 years ago. You know, their most successful league position, certainly, you know, looking to finish since. And in 2016, or just afterwards, of course, the team was to a certain extent picked apart. Mahrez left after a year, Kante left at the time, and you know, the central defensive partnership is no longer there. So this team is a fairly new one. It's also fairly young, with the exception of Vardy. My concern is, okay, Vardy gets to the point where he retires at some point, and I know, you know, he's still bouncing around like a bunny rabbit, so I doubt it's going to be that soon. But the rest of the team is very young, and every name that you've mentioned so far has attracted significant attention from clubs who would be considered traditionally to be bigger than Leicester, right? So my question is this: how many of those players who all appear to be crucial to the system need to leave before that sort of, you know, pyramid of cards falls down? You know, if you take Wilfred Ndidi out of that, have you got a big problem? Is he replaceable? If you take Maddison or Tielemans out, are they replaceable? And again, if and when Vardy either, you know, is struck down by a long-term injury, or if he, you know, his pace isn't quite what it was next season, I mean, I suppose I answer my own question by saying, well, Vardy probably isn't really replaceable because he's quite a unique player, right? But would that concern you if you were Brendan Rodgers? How long can I keep this squad together?
That always has to be a concern, yes, and they certainly do have. They have players who are very, very good, but they're also very good for Leicester's style. So it does make it hard if you're looking to find, you know, the next Wilfred Ndidi, for example. That is obviously a tricky ask, and Ndidi has a very plausible claim to be, you know, well, if not the best defensive midfielder in the Premier League as a kind of screening midfielder. He's definitely in the top 3 there. So yeah, clearly they're going to want to hang on to people like Ndidi, Soyuncu, Barnes, Maddison. These are all very good players.
Chilwell has been mentioned a lot too.
Chilwell's been mentioned a lot. Pereira. I mean, you know, this is what happens when a squad is perceived to have overperformed. You know, people look at that and they go, okay, well, these players are all doing exceptionally well. They're very good players. And these, you know, they are objectively good players outside of the Leicester system as well. They just happen to look particularly good given how Leicester are playing. There is a perception, obviously, that Leicester are a smaller team, the Premier League winner side, you know, so if you're a Manchester City or a Manchester United or an Arsenal or whatever, there's an expectation you can pick those guys off. Having said that, if I were a Leicester player at the moment, I would be looking at the opportunity of competing in Champions League football, of being in a position to be regularly in the title hunt. That, to me, is a more attractive prospect at Leicester City than it would be at a supposedly bigger club that actually isn't doing that well. And I think there's maybe an analogue slightly with with maybe some of Spurs players. You know, Spurs, yes, they're generally around the top 6, aren't they? But they're, aside from getting to the Champions League final in that season where they were very much in the hunt for the Premier League title until right towards the end, it's arguable that some of those players were regularly linked with other bigger teams, and that maybe they felt that there was a better chance of silverware away from that club. But they stayed loyal to it. They stayed loyal to the project. I think having a manager who is able to achieve buy-in with that, as Pochettino did at Spurs and as Rodgers is clearly doing at Leicester, is a significant impetus to stay.
Also, having a chief executive who repeatedly re-signs them to deals every year.
Yeah, no, definitely. But again, if you're Leicester, you know, Leicester do have a good scouting department, and we're using quite advanced analytics well before Rodgers came in. So they're good at finding, you know, younger players who have the opportunity to then shine, but they are also quite canny about signing players to longer term deals. I would also look at, you know, yes, Vardy obviously is an older, experienced head, but you've got Johnny Evans at the club as well, who is a very, very good, but also you know, a really experienced Premier League player and a proper dressing room leader, I would imagine.
Premier League title winner.
Right, and then you've also got Kasper Schmeichel. You know, so there are figureheads at that club who seem to conduct themselves really, really well, and are a genuinely good example to younger players. And those players will probably be looking at that and thinking, you know, there's an atmosphere here at the club. There's a good manager who's got a clear blueprint, who's being backed by the board. There's good recruitment behind the scenes. Everything is heading in the right direction. So if I were, you know, there really aren't many clubs that I would genuinely consider leaving Leicester City for. Probably only Manchester City and Liverpool at this point, because, and that's not simply a reflection of the current standing of the league table, but I think that's
what if they're going to triple your wages?
Well,
that's the thing. I mean,
sure,
I know it sounds a little bit tabloid, but that's what it always comes down to, Alex, right? I mean, it just seems to me like, what's Maddison earning at Leicester? What are Manchester United prepared to pay Maddison to play for them?
Well, I mean, this is one of, like, I don't know, but I do think that Manchester United are an interesting instance, because yes, you are obviously always going to have some players who will put pure cash in the bank ahead of other stuff. And that is absolutely their right, because sports people have curtailed careers because of injury and age, and the window of opportunity is quite small. So yeah, you know, go for it. But if you want to look at the opportunity to win things, and a lot of the guys that we're talking about are early on in their careers, right? They're in their early 20s, most of them. So this is not something that is make or break for them at this moment in time. They could very reasonably have a good 2 or 3 years with Leicester and have those moves still available to them in all likelihood. It's really hard to know. I mean, how can you get into the head of a professional sportsman and know what motivates them? You can't. But I would suggest that everything is set up at Leicester for a period of success, which probably won't involve winning the title, simply because Liverpool and Manchester City are so strong at the moment, but absolutely could involve a good sustained run in the Champions League, potentially winning cup competitions in England. And, you know, if you're 21, 22, 23, the opportunity to do that at a club that's brought you through, shown confidence in you, has a manager that you get on with, has good examples of professional players who have, you know, had a sustained career in the game and achieved things. That's a really, really good setup to have. I think Leicester feels like a club that people would want to be at in the same way that Liverpool does, for example. And I don't think you can say that for some of the alternative options that are out there for those players.
I bet they're looking forward to winning the domestic English top league every year after the European Super League starts as well. Don't you think? They're going to look forward to winning it by 50 points every year. I mean, you know, closely followed by Wolves or whatever.
Yes, that is one of the things that I guess is in the background, and obviously the football landscape is going to have changed dramatically post-COVID, and a European Super League is potentially one of the things that is being talked about. And it is weird because you look at someone like Leicester. Yes, okay, they won the title in fairly remarkable circumstances, the like of which is very unlikely to be repeated. But they aren't considered in that kind of powerhouse group of clubs. And it begs a question of how does one then decide who would go into a European Super League? Obviously a club like Arsenal, for example, in terms of reputation, in terms of previous achievements, very much would deserve to be there. But in terms of who is currently very, very good, who is currently playing interesting and attractive football, which is obviously part of the consideration because the European Super League would be a commercial entity that would seek to attract a certain type of play. Leicester would arguably have a stronger argument for being there than Arsenal at the moment. So who knows?
Who knows indeed. Okay, well, thanks, Alex. You'll be around for next week's podcast in full because it's about your club, Saints.
Yes, indeed. Yes, I'm very excited. At last, we're getting some attention.
Rob, Brendan Rodgers is the Leicester City manager, and in the notes here, Seb has said he's called it Brendan 2.0, which is I guess what Seb considers a slightly reinvented version of the persona seen at Liverpool. What were your expectations of Rodgers before he came in, and as he's come in, and what's been the reality of covering him on a day-to-day basis with Brendan 2.0 in mind?
Well, obviously we'd seen the Liverpool documentary, so we weren't quite sure what we were going to get, whether we were going to be handed some envelopes or what have you. But no, I knew that he had a great record in Scotland, and I knew that he did a very good job at Liverpool. They almost won the title until Gerrard slipped. So and I remember his Swansea side playing against Leicester a few years back as well, and seeing the style of football there. So I knew what sort of football he wanted to play. He wanted to play a fast, intense game, play out from the back. Very different to what we'd seen that had led to Leicester City winning the title in 2016. I knew it was going to be a little bit of a departure to that extent. But since he's come in, he's been an absolute pleasure to work with in terms of the media. He's very personable. He's a great communicator. I can see his man management is going to be top drawer as well. The way he deals with players, from talking to players and talking to different people around the club, how he deals with them, how his open door policy, how he makes a point to speak to everybody and shake hands. I've seen him in the reception at the stadium on press days. Anybody just milling around, he'll go over and say hello to. Just members of the public that have popped in for something, and if he's walking through, he'll say hello and ask them if they enjoyed the last game and are they coming to the next game and stuff like that. So he is one of those sort of inspiring characters in many ways, because when you hear him talk about what he wants to do, you get the impression that the players will follow him. And I think that was the big problem for Claude Puel, that lack of communication. He wasn't able to do that, and certainly not as well as Brendan. So I think Brendan coming in has been a little bit reinvented in many ways, because he's gone up to Scotland, had fantastic success. Feels like he's got unfinished business in the Premier League, and picked Leicester City as the club to help fulfil that ambition. And also because of that little perception of him that came about from that Liverpool documentary and that period, then he has sort of reined that sort of thing in. He still comes out with a few interesting sort of little philosophical sort of slow sayings and things like that, but not as many. And but he's been really good for the football club at the moment. He's been the right man at the right time so far, because I think Claude Puel, some of the work he did has not been really appreciated by some of the Leicester supporters. I mean, I wrote a piece for The Athletic recently about Claude time. I did an interview with him, and it's very easy to forget that the side that's out there now playing so well under Brendan Rodgers, a lot of that side was put together by Claude, bringing some of those younger players in and promoting the likes of Chilwell, Harvey Barnes from the under-23s into the side. I mean, he did face a tough task in terms of dealing with an ageing team of legends that won the title. There had to be an evolution of that squad, inevitably so. What Claude did is he didn't do it in a particularly personal way in terms of Wes Morgan and Christian Fuchs and some of the older guys. He didn't still make them feel that they were valued at the football club as much as Brendan does, and that's one of the first things that Brendan did. He came in, he got Wes, Christian, Casper, Jamie Vardy, got them all on side, and of course they're the leaders within the camp. So if they follow Brendan, the rest of the squad will follow them. So that's one of the things that Brendan's done particularly well, which Claude didn't do. But I think in terms of bringing that squad together, though, Claude did a lot of work initially, but he couldn't carry it on. I think it's worked out perfectly for Leicester City now that Brendan is the right man to come in, pick up from where Claude left off, and carry it on and take them just into a bit more of a modern feel about the way they play now. It's so much more intensity. They're pressing high up the pitch. They work incredibly hard. Their fitness levels are up there. That was one of the first things they did. He identified they weren't fit enough to play the style of football he wanted to play, and but he's got them there now. And I think certainly in the first half of the season, you saw the work that Brendan's been doing.
Rob, this is going to be a really difficult question for you to answer, but I'm really sold on what Rodgers' Leicester are as a side. But I mean, who do you think individually in that side has benefited most from his arrival? Because obviously one of Rodgers' selling points is how he relates to younger players and the way he communicates with them, and how he's enabled players to grow. I mean, you think of Raheem Sterling in the past. It's quite hard to separate players like Maddison and Barnes and Tielemans, and actually Hamza Chowdhury, who I think is a really, really good player. And Wilfred Ndidi. Who's the one player that's kind of made the biggest journey from A to B since he turned up?
Well, the biggest change in a player is actually one of the oldest is Jamie Vardy. I mean, the team now is actually playing to his strengths, which was one of the big things that the fans used to aim at Claude Puel, was that he didn't have the team playing to Jamie's strengths. They like the ball in behind the defence. They like quick action as well. He's always looking for that through ball, but Brendan's made him the focal point of the side again, which wasn't the case because Claude used to leave Jamie out for certain games and leave him out for cup games, and certainly when they got to the quarterfinals of the FA Cup and the League Cup, the fans felt there was a great opportunity there missed because of Claude not fielding his strongest team. Brendan's been totally different. Jamie's been pretty much an ever-present, unless he's had a little niggle. And you've seen the goals he's been scoring. He was on one of those runs again earlier in the campaign. I mean, we all started to think, well, you can't do that again, can he? Scoring 11 consecutive games. But he was on a roll. So he's probably benefited more than anybody, Jamie. But certainly the younger players have. I mean, you look at Chola Soyuncu. I mean, he showed a lot of faith in Soyuncu because of his losing Harry Maguire. World record fee, £80 million to Manchester United. You think, well, what are they going to do here now? Because you've just weakened your side to one of the rivals, one of the clubs that you're aspiring to challenge for Champions League spots. What are you going to do? And they did try and get James Tarkowski in, but they failed with a bid for him. But then Brendan said, right, okay, I've seen enough of this Soyuncu lad. I'm going to give him a chance. He's going to be my partner for Johnny Evans, and he's put him in, and he's been outstanding. I mean, we saw him briefly under Claude, and he always had a mistake in him. He looked like a very rash young defender. You got to understand sometimes you can't always win the ball, but he would try and win it every time, and he'd give away free kicks or he'd get turned and get caught out of possession. And he was, he had always had an error in him, but he's cut that out under Brendan. He very rarely makes a mistake, and he's been a great signing for them so far.
With I mean, sorry, Ciencio, I completely agree. Do you think he got this relates to something else I was going to ask you, but do you think he got spooked around sort of November, December? Because there was something like, I remember him starting the first sort of 3 or 4 months of the season, and he was absolutely brilliant. Actually surprisingly good on the ball as well, given his build and his profile as a footballer. He looks like a kind of he looks like a character from 252. Yeah, exactly.
He wouldn't be doing that if he was playing under Nigel Pearson, that's for sure. But he's a talent. He is a talent. But I think what we've got to understand as well about this young side is that when you have young players, they're learning on the job, and this is his first full season. in the Premier League, and it is a tough division. And I think that sometimes the fans expect a little bit too much from some of the younger players. I mean, Ben Chilwell had it when he first broke into the first team under Claude, and he went through a spell where his form dipped. And they all say, he's rubbish, get Christian Fuchs back in. But you just got to stick with them and give them confidence, and they will have little dips in the season, the young lads, until they... But with every season, with more experience, they'll get stronger and they'll be more consistent. I mean, Sionsu's got a fantastic, perfect, almost role model next to him in Johnny Evans. I mean, Johnny Evans has been fantastic this season. And, I picked him as my player of the year. I know Jamie's been banging in all the goals at the one end, but he's a Rolls Royce of a defender. So if Sionsu's playing alongside him week in, week out, he'll learn, and he'll get better as well. But inevitably, I think young players will have little dips in form. They might have a little loss of confidence at certain stages in the season. And Leicester went through their little blip as well, where the intensity of how they play seems to catch up with them. They look physically tired in certain games, and when your game is dependent on that intensity, then that's going to be an issue. But again, physical strength comes with age as well with players. That's why they peak when they're 28, 29, 30. So these guys have got plenty of time on their side.
Do you think this is kind of the missing ingredient? So last Leicester game I covered was at the Etihad, the 3-1. I remember thinking there's something slightly underwhelming about that group of players in certain situations. And I might be being a bit spoilt, and I might be doing them a terrible disservice by expecting them to mature earlier than they should reasonably do so. But it's almost as if, in certain games, they line up against sides who have vulnerabilities. I think, Man United, Old Trafford, right at the beginning of the season would be another instance of that. Is this just a question of keeping this group together and waiting for them to learn these lessons, or does it actually need supplementing from the outside?
Well, I think they're always constantly looking to strengthen the squad and the side, and I know they were planning to do that this summer as well. Another centre-half probably would have been high on the agenda, perhaps another attacking player as well to add more goals, to ease the reliance on Vardy. I think that's always a work in progress, as any football squad is. But I also think that they're trying to build this team to deliver sustained success over a number of seasons, and this is still very early days for them. And then sometimes in these big games, though, it does come good for them. I mean, last season they beat Man City and Chelsea over Christmas in one really good period. It all seemed to fall away after that, but they can rise to the occasion against the big sides. But this is all about experience, I think. I mean, going up against a seasoned side like Manchester City in their own backyard, that's daunting for young players, and I think sometimes there might be an element that perhaps they don't believe in themselves enough, that they're good enough at that stage. But I think that with time, with experience, another season with Brendan, I think you'll see some of these lads now really starting to step up. I mean, James Maddison's going to become an England international. He's that good. He will play for England. Ben Chilwell is now pretty much was established as the England left back, and so his confidence will be growing as he develops as well. They've just got to stay focused on what they're trying to do with Leicester City and listen to Brendan, and they will develop and they will get better and they will start pushing teams like Man City on a more consistent basis.
So this came up when I was speaking to Alex for the middle section of this podcast, but I wanted to ask you as well, Rob, because you mentioned Maddison and Chilwell there. We've, Ndidi, Tielemans and Soyuncu we've already spoken about too, Vardy obviously, and Evans. All of these players have attracted interest from other clubs. I could probably take Vardy off that list now, because I think the point at which he was going to leave for a club that would be considered traditionally bigger is probably past. But all of those other players appear on the back pages with the transfer rumours, and you can see why, because it's a fantastic team, and outside of the top four, which of course Leicester are currently in the top four, but I mean the clubs that are considered to be part of that top four, top six. Outside of those squads, there isn't a better squad than Leicester's. It's plain to see. Do you worry about the team being able to keep that squad together? Do you worry that if Maddison or Tielemans or Ndidi were to leave, that might have a significant sort of shift in the balance of play, or that one or two players leaving might start a kind of exodus as we've seen at other clubs? Because I suppose it would be a bit of a worry, right?
No, not really, because I know inevitably they won't be able to keep all their players all the time. But if you look at Leicester City's policy over the years, since they won the title, they've reluctantly sold one of their key players every summer, but only one. It started with N'Golo Kante, and then you had Danny Drinkwater, Riyad Mahrez, and Harry Maguire. They've all moved on now. But only one, and they've kept the rest together. Now, these young lads have got to look at the situation and say, right, okay, we're an up-and-coming team at Leicester. We're well looked after. We might not get the wages that they would get at other clubs, but they're getting an opportunity to play, and they're playing in a good side. They're catching the eye. The fact that people are talking about them and linking them with Man United and Chelsea and Manchester City, is that because they're getting an opportunity to perform on the biggest stage? And if you look at the likes of Chilwell, he's become an England international whilst playing for Leicester. James Maddison's going to be an England international whilst playing for Leicester. So there are opportunities for them. Inevitably, yes. I'm sure if there was big offers coming in for them from the likes of Man United and Man City, then it'd be very hard for them not to have their head turned by that. But on the flip side of that is, they're playing with their mates, playing good football, and playing lots of football, the regular starters. So it's whether they want to continue down that road, or when they feel the time is right for them to move on. But in terms of Leicester City selling players, I mean, as you saw with the Harry Maguire situation, they weren't going to sell him for anything less than a world record. So it also tests the mettle of the club that's trying to buy one of their players. And a lot of the times they've had it. I mean, look at the stance with Riyad Mahrez. He eventually got his move, but it was 2 windows before he eventually got his move. And, they stood firm in January when Man City came in with an offer which they didn't see as acceptable, and they turned it down on transfer deadline day, or the day before transfer deadline day. And that sparked his absence from the club for 10 days and missed 2 games, but they still stood firm on it, because the message is, we're here, we're aspiring to be a club that can compete with the best in English football. And what sort of message would that be if they did, for example, like Southampton did, and sold off all their best players? You just see what's happened at Southampton when we went down there. It was 9-0 drubbing. So I think they've learnt a lesson from that in terms of the message they want to send out in terms of their aspiration to be considered one of the best clubs in the Premier League.
And risking like player fallouts like the Mahrez situation presumably is a sort of risk worth taking in that scenario, right? Because it's not just about that incident, it's about every other possible incident.
Well, yeah, but also it sends out a message to the rest of the players there, isn't it? That, you're happy to sign big contracts, and that's what they do with the younger players. They try and keep them on a long contract. So Maddison's in contract negotiations now over an improved contract. Chilwell signed a long-term contract. All these lads are signed up for a long time, so there's a bit of security there for the club, but also security there for the players as well. So yes, in terms of players being upset, there's a group of players, the senior players down there, that police that as well. They've got a little bit of elements of being independent to some extent in there, and how they deal with any sort of disruption within the camp. It's basically not allowed. I mean, fair play to Riyad, because when he came back from that, he did play quite well for the rest of the season for Leicester City. He did get his head back on his career, and I don't think people could complain too much about his performances after that. And although Leicester did go on a little blip after that, which ultimately led to Claude's departure around February time, it did cast a little bit of a cloud over it, but they were. I think the long-term gain was more important than the short-term pain in terms of what they were going to have to deal with internally.
Yeah. Okay. Hey, well, listen, I think we're going to leave it there. But Rob, thanks ever so much for coming. We really appreciate that.
That's great. No problem. Thank you.
And we will be back next week with something else. Can't remember what, but something's happening. As
doing
it does
Southampton next week.
There you go. You spoiled my joke, Seb. I always know what it is. I just pretend that I don't.
No, I'm just running your punchlines.
Yeah.
Week by week.
Yeah. Okay.